At 10:17 on a Saturday morning, my future mother-in-law pushed the dress I loved back into the fitting room and told the consultant to bring us something more appropriate. I was still standing on the platform. The silk skirt rested around my shoes in a clean ivory circle. The bodice had a square neckline, narrow straps, and 37 fabric-covered buttons down the back. There was no lace, no glitter, no train long enough to require its own attendant. When I moved, the silk made a dry whisper that reminded me of pages turning in an old book. I had known it was my dress before the consultant finished fastening the last button. Celeste Rourke had known she hated it just as quickly. She stood beside the velvet sofa with her handbag tucked into the bend of her elbow. Her pale blue jacket was still buttoned even though the fitting room was warm. She looked at my reflection and said the dress was too severe, too ordinary, and not nearly formal enough for a Rourke wedding. Then she turned to the consultant and asked for the Marabelle gown in champagne, size 8. The consultant, a woman named Priya, looked at me in the mirror. I said, I did not ask to see the Marabelle. Celeste smiled as if I had misunderstood a harmless favor. She said Adrian had invited her because I was overwhelmed and needed someone who understood the family standard. That was the first time I learned my fiancé had invited his mother to choose my wedding dress. He had told me she was coming for brunch afterward. I looked down at my hands. My left thumb was smoothing the seam where the skirt met the bodice. I do that when I am trying to understand how something was put together. I had spent 11 years conserving historic clothing for the Bellwether Textile Archive. I could look at a torn cuff and tell whether the damage came from strain, insects, light, or a repair made with the wrong thread 40 years earlier. Damage always had a direction. So did control. Priya asked whether I wanted to change before they brought another gown. I said yes. Celeste said we had only begun. I stepped off the platform, gathered the ivory skirt in both hands, and went behind the curtain. On the hook beside my jeans hung a cream tag with the style number written in black ink, Vela 214. The price was $2,480, more than I had planned to spend, less than the champagne dress Celeste had already requested on my behalf. I photographed the tag at 10:19. Then I changed. Adrian and I had been engaged for 9 months. We were due to marry on October 12th at Wrenmere House, a stone lodge beside a narrow artificial lake outside the fictional town of Marlow Glen. The venue had cedar beams, gray fireplaces, and a dining room Celeste described as intimate when she meant small. We had invited 84 people. I had chosen rust-colored napkins, white anemones, and long tables instead of rounds. Adrian had chosen the music and the late-night food. We had made every decision together, or I had believed we had. He was 35 and worked as an operations manager for a laboratory supplier called North Vale Instruments. He liked spreadsheets, weather reports, and buying the same navy socks 6 pairs at a time. He could make a complicated week feel orderly. When my father had surgery the previous spring, Adrian drove 3 hours to sit with me in a waiting room that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. He brought a phone charger and the cardigan I had forgotten. That steadiness was why I trusted him. It was also why I did not understand the boutique. 2 weeks earlier, I had booked a private appointment at Lark and Thimble Bridal. I invited my younger cousin May because she knew how to tell me when something was beautiful without pretending it was automatically right for me. My mother had died when I was 26. Dress shopping without her had been the only wedding task I kept postponing. The night before the appointment, Adrian mentioned that Celeste would meet us at the boutique and join us for brunch. He said it casually while rinsing 2 bowls in our kitchen. I told him I had invited May for the fitting and was happy to see his mother afterward. He dried his hands on a striped towel. Then he said Celeste had been looking forward to helping and had strong opinions about formal wear. He made it sound like the addition had already been settled. I asked whether he had invited her. He said she had asked about the appointment, and he had told her the time. That was not the same answer. I told him I wanted the fitting to be small. He kissed my temple and said, "She only wants you to feel welcomed. Let her have this one thing." The phrase stayed with me. This one thing. Celeste had already chosen the rehearsal dinner restaurant because she knew the owner. She had replaced the printer I selected for the invitations because hers used heavier paper. She had added 12 people to the guest list, including a retired orthodontist Adrian had not seen since he was 14. Each change arrived as a small thing, already completed, wrapped in usefulness. I had not fought most of them. The paper was good. The restaurant was fine. We found room for the extra guests. I told myself compromise was not erasure. At the boutique, May was delayed by a flat tire. She texted at 9:52 that roadside assistance was on the way. By then, Celeste had arrived, carrying a folder. Inside were photographs of dresses. All 12 had lace sleeves. She gave the folder to Priya and said we needed something suitable for an autumn evening and flattering through the shoulders. She said this while looking directly at my shoulders. I am 5'8", with straight dark hair and arms made strong by lifting storage trays wider than my torso. I have never disliked my shoulders. That morning, under Celeste's inspection, I became aware of every inch of them. Priya asked me what I wanted. I said clean lines, ivory rather than bright white, no lace, and no heavy beading. I wanted a dress I could walk in without needing someone to arrange me each time I stopped. Celeste tapped her folder and said brides often changed their minds once they saw the photographs. The first 2 dresses were wrong. One had stiff tulle that scratched the inside of my arms. The other had a low back that made me hold myself like I was balancing a tray. Priya brought the vela third. Its construction was almost architectural. 4 panels formed the skirt. The side seams curved forward by less than half an inch, drawing the eye toward the center without forcing the waist. The silk had enough weight to fall cleanly and enough movement to respond when I breathed. There are garments that ask a person to perform. The vela did not. It let me stand there as myself. Celeste watched me look at it. Then she rejected it before I could speak. When I came out of the fitting room in my jeans and white shirt, the champagne Maribel was waiting on the door. It was covered in embroidered vines and tiny beads. The skirt began high on the waist and widened into 6 layers of netting. The price tag said $4,950. Celeste touched the sleeve and said Adrian would love it. I asked how she knew. She said because he had chosen it with her. The room went quiet enough that I heard a delivery truck reverse in the alley behind the boutique. Priya lowered her hands. Celeste seemed to realize she had said more than she intended. She adjusted the cuff of her jacket and explained that Adrian had looked through the boutique's online catalog with her. He liked the Maribel. He thought it suited the venue. He only wanted the day to feel coherent. I asked when they had done that. She said Tuesday evening. Tuesday evening, Adrian had told me he was staying late to review warehouse numbers. I remembered the text he sent at 7:08. Still buried, eat without me. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I picked up my bag and asked Priya to hold the vela until closing. Celeste said there was no reason to be dramatic. I told her I was not being dramatic. I was leaving. She followed me past the display of pearl combs. She said I had misunderstood the point. Adrian knew I found decisions difficult. He wanted to spare me the stress. The Rourkes had hosted formal weddings for generations, and photographs lasted. She could see details I could not. At the glass door, I turned back. I said, "You did see one detail I did not. You knew Adrian had already chosen." Then I walked outside. The morning had turned bright and cold. A row of young maples along Winslow Street shivered in the wind. I sat in my car without starting it and opened the photograph of the vela's tag. At 10:31, Adrian called. I watched his name fill the screen. I let it stop. He called again. Then he sent 3 messages. The first said his mother had called him upset. The second said he did not understand why I had left. The third said we should all calm down and meet for brunch as planned. I read them twice. Not one asked whether I was all right. May arrived at 10:46 in the passenger seat of a roadside assistance van. The driver lowered her flat tire from the back, and she found me across the street with both hands around a paper cup I did not remember buying. She climbed into my car. Her cheeks were pink from the wind. She listened without interrupting while I told her what had happened. When I finished, she asked one question. She said, "Do you still want the dress?" I looked through the boutique window. The villa was no longer visible from the street. I could picture the curve of the neckline and the neat row of buttons. I said yes. May said, "Then the dress is the easy part." That was true. The dress had never been difficult. Adrian was waiting when I reached our apartment at 12:22. He had cleared the breakfast dishes and opened the blinds. The room smelled faintly of the cedar candle he lit whenever we had company, though no one was coming. He stood when I entered. He said his mother had only been trying to help. I set my keys in the blue dish by the door. I asked why he had lied about Tuesday night. He said he had not lied. He had gone to his mother's after work, and they had looked at dresses for 20 minutes. He had still worked late. I asked why he chose a dress before I tried on a single gown. He rubbed the back of his neck. It was the gesture he used when a meeting had gone badly, and he wanted to describe it as a communication problem. He said he had not chosen. He had given an opinion. His mother knew the boutique and asked what he liked. The Maribel looked elegant. He thought I would look beautiful in it. I said, "You sent her to make sure I wore it." He said, "I asked her to guide you." There it was. Not help, guide. I walked to the dining table and sat down. Our invitation sample was propped against a bowl of pears. Harlow Finch and Adrian Rourke, it read, together with their families. The lettering was pressed into thick cream paper selected by Celeste. I asked him to sit across from me. For 40 minutes, I asked direct questions. I treated the conversation the way I treated a damaged garment before conservation. I did not begin repairing, I documented. Had he shown Celeste my dress budget? Yes. Had he told her I was indecisive? He said he had told her I was stressed. Had he discussed my body with her? He paused. Then he said they had only talked about which shapes might suit me. Had he planned to tell me they had already selected the Maribel? He said he assumed it would become obvious at the appointment. Had he asked Celeste to come to brunch or the fitting? The fitting. Why had he told me brunch? He said because he knew I might say no. The answer landed cleanly. He had not misunderstood my boundary. He had routed around it. Adrian leaned forward. He said his mother was paying for half the reception. She had one son. She cared about the wedding. It cost me nothing to let her participate. I said it had already cost me the truth. He looked tired then, not cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruelty would have been easy to identify. Adrian believed he was balancing 2 women with unreasonable feelings. He believed the calmest person should yield because she could absorb the pressure with the least noise. I had been calm for most of our relationship. He had mistaken that for flexibility without limit. I asked what else his mother believed she had authority to decide. He said authority was an unfair word. I waited. He admitted she had asked the florist to replace the rust napkins with dove gray. She had spoken to Renmere House about moving the ceremony indoors if the temperature fell below 60 degrees. She had also asked whether the caterer could remove the mushroom tart from the menu because his aunt disliked mushrooms. I had designed that tart with the chef because it was my father's favorite. Adrian said none of those requests had been finalized. I asked who had stopped them. He did not answer. At 1:14, I took a yellow legal pad from the drawer. I wrote 3 headings: money, contracts, decisions. Adrian watched me. He asked whether I was really turning our wedding into an audit. I said, no, I am checking whether it is still ours. Under money, I listed every contribution. My father had given us $8,000. Adrian and I had each saved $12,000. Celeste had promised $14,000 toward dinner and flowers. No money had changed hands yet, but the promise had grown into a vote on everything from sleeves to soup. Under contracts, I wrote the names of 6 vendors. 5 were in my name because I had handled the deposits. The photographer was in both names. Renmere House allowed cancellation with a partial refund until July 1. It was May 18th. Under decisions, I listed each change Celeste had proposed and marked the ones Adrian had concealed. There were 4. 4 was not a misunderstanding. Adrian became quieter as the page filled. He said he should have told me. I said yes. He said he hated being caught between us. I said, you were not caught. You brought her inside and placed me outside. He looked toward the window. For the first time that day, his face changed. The organized explanation left it. He looked ashamed. I wanted that to be enough. I wanted one honest expression to repair the structure underneath it. But in conservation, a clean surface can hide weakened fibers. You do not test strength by admiring the color. You test the places that carry weight. I slid the legal pad toward him. I said the wedding was paused for 30 days. We would contact every vendor on Monday and place a temporary hold where possible. We would not accept his mother's money. No one would change a decision without both of us agreeing. He would tell Celeste that himself, with me present, and he would not describe the boundary as mine alone. Adrian stared at the page. He asked what happened if his mother was offended. I said, she will be offended. He asked what happened if she withdrew from the wedding. I said, then we will know what her presence depended on. He asked what happened if he needed more than 30 days. I said, then we will not marry in October. He stood and walked to the kitchen. The refrigerator motor clicked on. Somewhere upstairs, a child dragged something heavy across a floor. Adrian rested both hands on the counter and said he needed air. I said, take it. He left at 1:37. At 2:05, Priya called from Larkin Thimble. She said Celeste had returned to the boutique after brunch. She had asked them to release the vela because the family had selected another gown. Priya had refused. She said the hold was under my name and would remain until 5. I thanked her. Then I opened my savings account. The account held $9,760. It was mine from before the engagement, built in uneven pieces from overtime work, a tax refund, and the sale of a collection of antique fashion plates I no longer had space to store. Adrian knew the account existed. He did not have access to it. I transferred $2,700 into checking to cover the dress and tax. May picked me up at 3:30. We returned to the boutique without Celeste, without champagne, and without the folder of lace sleeves. The afternoon light came through the high front windows and lay across the wooden floor in long rectangles. Priya had returned the vela to its padded hanger. She asked if I wanted to try it again. I said yes. This time the fitting room was quiet. May sat on the velvet sofa with her flat tire receipt sticking out of her bag. Priya fastened the buttons. I stepped onto the platform and looked at myself without anyone telling me what the reflection needed to become. The neckline framed my collarbones. The skirt fell exactly as I remembered. There was a faint crease near the left hip from the hanger. Nothing steam could not release. May asked how it felt. I said, like I can breathe. I bought the wedding dress Celeste had rejected at 4:12 that afternoon. I paid for it with my own card. The receipt was 21 inches long. Priya folded it once and placed it in an ivory envelope. The dress would remain at the boutique for alterations, but she gave me the fabric-covered sample button from the designer's swatch card. I slipped it into the coin pocket of my jeans. Outside, May asked if buying it meant the wedding was still happening. I said, "It means the dress belongs to me. That is the only decision I am making today." Adrian did not return until after 9. He slept on the sofa without being asked. On Sunday morning, he made coffee and told me he had called his mother. He had not set the boundary. He had asked her to give us a few days. I put my coffee down. I said that was not what I had asked him to do. He said he was trying to keep the situation from escalating. I said, "It has already escalated. You are still trying to make my boundary temporary enough for her to wait it out." He looked at me over the rim of his mug. He said I was making him choose. I said, "I am asking you to choose whether decisions in our marriage belong to the two people in it." We did not solve it that morning. On Monday at 8:30, I called Renmere House. I spoke to a coordinator named Elise and moved our booking into a 60-day courtesy hold. We would lose $600 if we canceled before July 1, and $4,800 if we canceled after. I wrote both numbers on the yellow pad. At 9:15, I called the florist and learned the napkins had already been changed to gray. The request came from Celeste's email, but Adrian had approved it 3 days earlier. At 9:42, I called the caterer. The mushroom tart was gone. Adrian had approved that too. At 10:06, I left my desk at the archive and went into storage room C, where no one could see me through the narrow wired glass window. I sat on a low stool between racks of acid-free boxes and cried for 6 minutes. I know, because the environmental monitor above the door changes display screens every 3 minutes. Temperature, humidity, time. I watched it cycle twice. Then I washed my face in the conservation sink and returned to work. That week, my main project was an 1891 traveling coat made of brown wool. Someone had repaired the lining in the 1950s with thick nylon thread. The repair looked sturdy from a distance, but the nylon had no give. Every time the old silk shifted, the newer thread cut deeper into it. Good intentions did not make incompatible materials safe. On Tuesday evening, Adrian and I called the florist and restored the rust napkins. He sounded embarrassed. On Wednesday, we restored the mushroom tart. On Thursday, he told Celeste we would not accept her $14,000. He made the call from our dining table with the phone on speaker. Celeste was silent for several seconds. Then she said she had never heard of parents being excluded from their only son's wedding. Adrian said she was not excluded. She was invited as his mother, not appointed as a planner. She said the distinction was insulting. He said it was necessary. Her voice sharpened. She said I had created a crisis over a dress because I wanted to prove I could separate him from his family. Adrian looked at me. I could see the old reflex arrive. His jaw tightened. He drew a breath, ready to soften the moment by offering her something that belonged to us. Then he stopped. He said, "Harlow did not create this. I did. I invited you after she said she wanted a small fitting. I hid that from her because I knew she would object. That was my choice." Celeste said he was reciting words I had given him. He said, "They are my words." The call ended 2 minutes later. Adrian set the phone down. His hands were trembling slightly. He said she had never ended a call with him before. I said I was sorry it hurt. I did not tell him he had done well. He was not a child completing an assignment. He was a man repairing something he had damaged. For 3 days, Celeste sent no messages. On Sunday, she emailed Adrian a spreadsheet listing every expense she had covered for him since college. It included $180 for a cracked windshield when he was 23, $75 for groceries during a snowstorm, and $3,200 toward the down payment on the car he had already repaid. At the bottom, she had totaled the list. $18,614. No demand appeared beside the number. It did not need one. Adrian showed me the email at the kitchen counter. He looked ill. He said, "I always thought she remembered everything because she cared." I said, "Maybe she does care. Maybe this is also how she keeps the account open." He did not answer. The next morning, he made an appointment with a counselor through his employer's health plan. He told me after he booked it. He did not ask me to praise him. He did not use it as proof that I should restore the wedding date. That mattered. Still, change in 1 week is only intention. I needed evidence under weight. The first test came on May 29th. Celeste called the photographer and asked to add a formal portrait list. The list included 36 combinations of Rourke relatives and 3 photographs of me alone. She also asked that my father be seated during most of the group pictures, so Adrian's side would appear more symmetrical. The photographer forwarded the request to both of us. Adrian replied within 9 minutes. He said only the couple could change the shot list and asked the photographer to disregard any requests from other people. He copied Celeste. He did not warn me first. He did not ask me to write the message. He handled it. Celeste responded that she would not be photographed at all. Adrian wrote, "I hope you change your mind." Then he went back to work. The second test came in June, when his aunt Corinne called me at the archive. I had met her twice. She said families had customs, and marrying someone meant respecting the people who formed him. Her voice was controlled and almost gentle. I listened while standing beside a padded table covered with white cotton. When she finished, I said, "Adrian and I are handling our wedding together. I will not discuss it through relatives." She said Celeste was devastated. I said, "I am sorry she is hurting." Then I ended the call. That night, Adrian told Corinne not to contact me again about the wedding. He did not say I had complained. He said he was asking. The difference was small enough to miss if you did not know where strain collected. I knew. 30 days after the boutique appointment, Adrian and I sat at the same dining table with the same yellow pad. The pears were gone. A bowl of lemons stood in their place. He said he wanted to marry me, but he understood wanting was not the question. I asked what the question was. He said whether he could be a husband before acting like a son whenever the two roles collided. I looked at him for a long time. He did not promise the collision would never happen again. He said he had spent years avoiding his mother's disappointment by distributing it to other people, usually to himself, recently to me. He said he had called that peace because no one was shouting. That was the most honest thing he had said since the fitting. I told him I would continue the relationship, but I would not restore the October wedding. His eyes closed for 1 second. Then he nodded. We canceled Renmere House on June 19th. We lost $600 and recovered the rest. The florist returned all but $250. The invitation printer kept the design fee. Altogether, stopping the wedding cost us $1,430. Celeste told Adrian the loss proved I was impulsive. He told her the cost belonged to both of us because the decision belonged to both of us. We separated our wedding savings again. My $12,000 returned to my account. His returned to his. My father's money went back to him in 2 transfers because of the bank limit. He called after the second transfer and asked if I wanted to talk. I told him enough to be truthful and not enough to make him choose a villain. He said my mother would have liked the simple dress. I had not told him which dress I bought. I sat on the edge of my bed after the call and held the fabric-covered button in my palm until the imprint pressed into my skin. The villa remained at Lark and Thimble through the summer. I paid Priya to store it without alterations. Once a month, she emailed a short inventory note confirming the gown was covered, supported, and untouched. Adrian moved into a furnished apartment 6 blocks away on July 2nd. We did not call it a breakup. We also did not pretend proximity was repair. He took his clothes, his coffee grinder, and 3 of the 6 navy sock sets. He left the cedar candle because I had bought it. We met once a week in public. Sometimes we ate. Sometimes we walked around the reservoir at Halcyon Park. We discussed ordinary things before difficult ones: his work, my father's recovery, whether the basil plant on his new windowsill was dying from too much water. He kept seeing the counselor. I began seeing one too. In August, I told mine that I could catalog every concealed decision Adrian had made, but could not explain why I had accepted the visible ones for so long. She asked what I believed would happen if I objected early. I said I thought people would call me difficult. She asked what happened when I did not object. I said they called me easy. The word made me laugh once, without humor. At the archive, I completed the treatment on the brown traveling coat. I removed 118 nylon stitches under magnification. Each one had to be clipped at the center and drawn out from both sides so it would not pull against the silk. Then I supported the original lining with dyed silk crepeline, almost invisible once it was in place. The work took 7 weeks. Repair was slow because force was what had caused the damage. Celeste and I did not speak during those months. She sent a birthday card in September with only her name inside. I put it in a drawer. On October 12, the date that had been printed on our invitation sample, I woke at 6:40 to rain against the bedroom window. The temperature never rose above 54 degrees. Celeste had been right about the outdoor ceremony. That did not make her right about the rest. Adrian texted at noon and asked whether I wanted company. I said no. He replied that he understood. I spent the afternoon at the archive, even though it was Saturday. I checked the storage mounts for an upcoming exhibition and replaced tissue in 2 boxes. At 4:12, exactly 5 months after I bought the dress, I took the sample button from my wallet and set it beside the traveling coat. I had carried it so long that the ivory fabric had darkened at the edge. I left it there for an hour, then I put it back. The wedding date passed. Nothing ended because of that. Nothing began either. In November, Adrian invited me to his apartment for dinner. It was the first time I had gone there. The basil plant had died and been replaced by rosemary. On his refrigerator was a paper calendar marked with appointments, utility dates, and 1 square labeled "Call Mom." He had begun speaking with Celeste every other Sunday, instead of responding to several calls a day. He did not show me their messages. He told me only what affected us. After dinner, he said he owed me an answer to a question I had asked in May. He said the decisions in a marriage belonged to the people in it. Advice could be invited, money could be declined, disappointment could be survived. I asked what happened when he forgot. He said, "You tell me once, then I act. You do not carry me across the boundary." I said I would not. He said he knew. We did not become engaged again that night. He did not produce a ring or turn his progress into a proposal. We washed the dishes. He drove me home. At my door, he asked before kissing me. I said yes. Winter passed in measured pieces. Adrian returned to the apartment in February, after 7 months away. We wrote a shared budget. We divided household tasks. We agreed that neither of us would give a key to a relative without asking the other. These were ordinary agreements. Their ordinariness was the point. In March, Celeste asked to meet me. I chose a cafe called Juniper Table at 11 on a weekday. The room had green tile, bentwood chairs, and no family history in it. She arrived 6 minutes early. I arrived on time. For the first 10 minutes, she discussed weather and parking. Then she folded her napkin into a narrow rectangle and said she regretted that the dress appointment had become unpleasant. I said the appointment did not become anything by itself. She looked at me. I waited. She said she should not have told the consultant what to bring. I said no, she should not have. She said she had believed Adrian wanted her help. I said he did. That was his responsibility. What she did with the invitation was hers. She unfolded the napkin and smoothed it flat. Then she said something I had not expected. Her own mother-in-law had chosen her wedding dress. It had been high-necked satin with sleeves too tight at the wrist. Celeste hated it, but her husband had told her the family was paying and photographs mattered. She wore it for 11 hours. In every photograph, one shoulder sat higher than the other because the sleeve pulled when she moved. I asked why she wanted that for me. She said, "I thought being the one who knew what was proper would feel different from being the one who obeyed." There was no excuse in the sentence. There was explanation, which was not the same thing. I said, "Did it feel different?" She looked down at her coffee. She said, "Not afterward." We did not embrace. I did not tell her everything was forgiven. She asked whether I still had the vela. I said yes. She nodded once and said it had suited me. It was the nearest she came to naming what she had done. When I told Adrian about the meeting, he asked how I felt. I said, "Clear." He did not ask whether that meant his mother could return to the center of our plans. In April, he proposed again in our kitchen at 7:05 on a Tuesday morning. There were toast crumbs on the counter. I was wearing gray socks and an old sweatshirt from the archive. He did not kneel. He placed my ring in the blue dish where I kept my keys and said he would like to ask again, but only if I wanted to hear it. I looked at the ring for almost a minute. Then I said yes. He asked me to marry him. I said yes again. We planned a wedding for September 6 at the Oriole Glass House, a small greenhouse attached to a private garden in the fictional village of Alder Key. It held 40 people. The rental included wooden chairs, a long lunch table, and an indoor room in case of rain. We paid for it ourselves. There were no family contributions. There was no wedding committee. We sent every vendor a written instruction that changes required confirmation from both of us. It felt formal. It was also peaceful. Adrian chose pear cake with browned butter frosting. I chose grilled mushrooms on sourdough for the first course. We chose green linen napkins together. Celeste received an invitation addressed to her alone. She called Adrian and accepted. She did not ask what I was wearing. On June 4th, I returned to Lark and Thimble for alterations. Priya brought the vela from storage in a cotton garment bag. She laid it across the fitting room sofa and checked it from neckline to hem before I put it on. The silk was exactly as I remembered. Clean, quiet, mine. The waist needed to come in 3/4 of an inch. The hem needed to rise by 1.5. Priya pinned both sides while I stood on the platform. She asked whether I wanted a veil. I said no. I had brought one thing from the archive's approved personal collection, a narrow comb made of carved horn, dated around 1910, bought legally at a private sale and never accessioned. My mother had given it to me when I completed graduate school. I had worn it once. Priya set it into my hair. The dress did not need anything else. At the final fitting in August, May came with me. She sat on the same velvet sofa where Celeste had placed her folder 16 months earlier. Her phone showed 11:03. Outside, summer rain tapped the high windows. Priya fastened the 37 buttons. I stepped onto the platform. May smiled and said, "Still breathing?" I said, "Better than before." On September 6th, I dressed in a small tiled room behind the glass house. The morning was cool enough to fog the lower panes. Ferns pressed green shadows against the walls. May buttoned the dress while my father waited outside with the carved comb in its narrow box. At 12:18, I walked into the greenhouse. Adrian stood beneath an arch of olive branches. He wore a charcoal suit and the navy socks he always bought 6 pairs at a time. When he saw the dress, his face went still. Not disappointed, not surprised in the way I had once feared. He looked at me as if the room had settled into focus. Celeste sat in the second row beside Corinne. She wore the pale blue jacket from the first fitting. For a moment, I thought she might look away. She did not. Her eyes moved from the square neckline to the plain silk skirt. Then she met mine and gave one small nod. That was all. The ceremony lasted 14 minutes. No one spoke about obedience. We promised honesty, privacy, and the courage to disappoint other people before betraying each other. Those words were ours. At lunch, Celeste sat beside my father. She ate the mushrooms. She did not comment on the napkins. When the photographer asked for family pictures, she joined our list and stepped away when they were finished. Near 3, she found me alone by the far glass wall. Sunlight had begun to break through the clouds, and small drops on the roof flashed white above us. She looked at the dress and said, "You bought it that day, didn't you?" I said yes. At 4:12. She asked whether I had done it because she rejected it. I looked down at the silk. A faint green reflection from the ferns moved across the skirt. I said, "I bought it because I had chosen it." Celeste held my gaze. Then she said, "I understand." I believed she did, at least enough for that day. Adrian came to stand beside me. He did not interrupt or ask what we were discussing. Celeste touched his sleeve, wished us both a good evening, and returned to her seat. When the last guests left, the glass house smelled of cut pears, damp soil, and extinguished candles. Adrian carried 2 boxes to the car. I stayed behind for a moment, while May helped the staff gather place cards. There was a full-length mirror near the tiled dressing room. I stopped in front of it. The hem had collected a narrow line of garden dust. One fabric-covered button near my waist had loosened, though the thread still held. My mother's comb sat slightly crooked in my hair. I could hear Adrian outside, arranging boxes in the trunk, and my father laughing at something May had said. I reached into the hidden pocket Priya had added to the skirt. Inside was the original receipt, folded into a small ivory square. I had carried it through the ceremony without telling anyone. The paper was soft along the creases. At the top, beneath the name of the boutique, the time was still visible. 4:12 p.m. I folded it once more and slipped it back into the pocket. Then I pressed the loose button flat with my thumb. The dress Celeste had rejected moved with me as I turned toward the open door.